quick question before we get rolling
Yep.
into the proper matter. This is our 5th meeting.
Right.
This board actually met twice this month. I know this thing's going on and I have no idea how long it will take. I was thinking, is it possible we could expedite this a little by meeting more frequently? Rather, both sides just to get this sort of resolution. Is that possible or?
Yeah, so
The discussion that we were having was that we were hoping to perhaps continue this till next Tuesday. It looks like that could happen. We're waiting just confirmation on one other thing, but we do have witness availability and attorney availability. So the hope is that we can continue this till next Tuesday on our regularly scheduled date, and then kind of schedule it moving forward. Try to schedule it both on the regularly scheduled date, which would be, was it the 4th Tuesday?
Yeah.
The 4th Tuesday of the month, and then an alternate date that we pick amongst ourselves at that regularly scheduled date. So we're going to try to do 2 meetings a month to kind of speed this process up a little bit. So the idea would be, like I said, we're hoping our regularly scheduled meeting would be next Tuesday, the 25th. The hope is that we're going to continue this till that date, and then on that date we would then pick an alternate date.
What's the holdup for next week?
No, Adrian just confirming coverage. Mr. Cousins is just confirming coverage. That's all.
I'm pretty sure I can find somebody like just email it.
Yeah.
He
He's just giving, by the end of the hearing, I think he'll have an answer.
Okay, because then we could announce it, not have to advertise.
What's that?
We could.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's exactly yes, exactly.
And is there a
So-
ballpark of how many meetings we're
Well, I think we have, Mr. Blasey has 4 total witnesses. He will have 1, hopefully 2 tonight, and then 2 additional. And then I don't know if the township has any witnesses or anticipates calling any witnesses. Mr. Cousins?
It's possible we may call a township engineer, but we haven't.
Okay.
It depends on what the.
So
other-
possibly one witness there. And then I don't know, are there any people that have requested, or any individuals that have requested party status, have any witnesses that they anticipate calling? No? All right, I see no hands, no one's indicating that they have any witnesses, but then from there we would have party status if they want to provide any input. We can kind of limit that because I think they're going to only be able to testify to their own personal knowledge, and then from there, public comment.
Yeah.
And then if Mark, I don't know if you have any rebuttal witnesses, you may. Just to rebut some of the things that Mr. Blasey may provide. I know that doesn't give you a time frame, but it sounds,
Thank
to me, several more meetings, unfortunately.
Are
So,
we contemplating closings, written closings?
I was gonna discuss with you guys, down the road just to see where we were at, but I mean, I know, Mark, I know you generally like to file written stuff. I think in this particular case, that would be beneficial, because it probably sounds like it's being appealed no matter what happens. So, if you want to submit written stuff beforehand and we want to work out a schedule beforehand, happy to do that.
Let's get there. Because
Okay.
part of the problem is you've always got to wait for the last transcript.
Exactly.
That always gives you a
Exactly.
little bit of lag. But we're talking about 2 more hearings in June. No, 1 more in June.
One more in June.
2 in June, but 1 more, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
1 more in June, then 2 in July, and then 2 in August if necessary, 2 in September if necessary. And what we would do is God forbid, yes. And what I think we would do is if we had a separate hearing that scheduled that night, I think we would try to do that first and then continue, right? So, just I don't know if there are any down in the pipeline. Tina's not here yet, but
I'm not aware of any on the
Okay.
schedule yet.
so it looks like we have the summer pretty clear to kind of get this wrapped up. So
We would like to.
I know.
Everybody on the board here is okay
Uh-oh.
with that?
Yes, Doug.
We're all okay with that?
I
hang on.
Two witnesses, I'm good for both Mr. Shirley and, Mr. Rich, Dr. Elliott on this June, next Tuesday, but Dr. Elliott is not available in July until the end. So depending on how far.
Well, July, he's not available at all in July?
That's what he was told me
Okay.
today, except the 29th through the 31st.
And he is who?
That's, he is essentially soils and partially designed.
Okay.
Soils engineer.
And Mr.
Mr. Shirley is the appraiser.
If, let's see where we get through tonight. I mean, we may be able to move quicker than anticipated, yes.
Doug, if there's a possibility that you're gonna have Dr. whoever testify next week, I need a report.
Yeah, that's the part of the
I
problem.
wasn't expecting it to be next week, but we believe we can finish one additional report, hopefully in the next few days, and that would be that would be this gentleman's report. But I haven't talked to him today about, I know he's doing final edits, so when we get it. Okay.
A couple of questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to make sure that.
Just identify yourself. Who?
Oh, Mark Metzger. I just wanted to ask, the people sitting at the tables, can you guys please make sure you use those microphones with these fans? going?
Certainly.
It's really difficult to hear.
Understood. Thank you. Is that same thing? Okay. Okay. Anything else before we get started? Nope. Okay.
I think this is starting, so once you start, I'm just gonna hand out an exhibit from last month.
Okay. I just want to just for the record, what's the docket number again there on that, or the appeal number? 23-1, I think it is, right?
Yeah. Yep.
What is it? Read it specifically.
Yeah. 2023-01.
So that we're back here on the appeal for River Point Logistics, and then Doug, whenever you're ready to get started with.
I'll be very quick with this, but you don't have to stand.
I have to stand if you want to stand.
This was on the stand last week, as it was an exhibit 10 of the applicant, but I referenced it, and it was also marked I-4 for the interested party 4, and then I was given it to do with what I will, if you will, so I made copies of it
Okay.
for all. So this is both.
So it's I-4 and Exhibit 10 at A10.
And I don't necessarily intend to reference it now, but I made copies for it, and just so that confusion would be eliminated. There's an additional remark that. Now then I'm ready to call my first witness, which is Gary N.B. Cribbs. He's a professional geologist. I'll hand you all his resume and his report. We'll first go through his resume to qualify.
What were we going to call this one, Doug?
I think, we were to I-9, so this would be I-10. And I would,
Why does it say I-4 up on the top?
No, he's talking
Yeah.
about the report.
Oh, the report. Oh, I'm sorry.
and I was suggesting we do the resume as I-10 and then the report as I-11,
Okay.
okay? Mr. Cripps, there's no harm for you to have a resume in front of you while we talk about this if you wish. Would you tell us your educational background, how long you've been in this profession, and the type of things you specialize in?
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I've been in the business over 40 years. I have a bachelor's degree from University of Toledo in geology, and then a master's degree from the University of Toledo in geology. Of Toledo. All right, I have licensure in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Tennessee. I actually retired my New York and my Texas license because I'm not working up there anymore. And I've got a diverse background in all aspects of geology and engineering geology, structural geology, and hydrogeology, plus a few other ancillary aspects of it.
Do you mind telling us what those categories kind of represent and specialize in when you say engineering geology?
Okay. Well, just to follow through with the resume, the first one is geotechnical investigations. The vast majority of them were PennDOT related. Highway construction, bridge construction, though there were a few other things, some airports, some landfills, just wherever they needed geological help, hydrogeological help, I worked on those projects. Most of these are the large scale, high dollar value. Hydrogeological investigations in raw agricultural commodities, spring water development. Most likely you pick up a bottle of spring water today in Pennsylvania, chances are I've worked on those sources. I create the sources, get them permitted, and work with the bottle companies, get the rest of their facilities permitted. I'm a small company, basically myself, so when I've got a project that involves more disciplines, I hire out other individuals. I've got a civil engineer that does all my design parameters for the bottled water companies, things like that. A lot of the history involved a lot of wetland aspects. I work with a wetland biologist. I do the hydrogeology elements, maybe make sure there's always going to be water for the wetlands. She handles all the plantings and everything else. Plus, together we've done a number of projects that involve developing in areas that contain some hazardous waste material. So I would handle that aspect to it. Yeah, water bottling plant and development, number of plants. And then some public water supplies as well as for power plants. Once again, just doing the investigation, evaluating where they could get their water, how to develop it so it's sustainable in that aspect. The geotechnical investigations, like for the Delaware River channel deepening, I was the lead geologist working with another company it wasn't just so much the dredging aspect, is they had to remove 175,000 cubic yards of rock in order to make the depth 45 feet. So that was part of my project.
What were you doing with regard to that project? Finding the rock, identifying its characteristics, or what?
Basically what we did is we started in 2010 and we drilled 20 feet into the bedrock. We spent about 2 months doing all that. And then periodically over the time we did more drilling depending on what was discovered and where we needed to remove it. It lasted through 2016 when we came up with a blasting plan and how to remove the rock. But that was all my responsibility.
What is geologic engineering?
Geological engineering, or engineering geology, basically is when I'm working with a geotechnical engineer in design for foundations, foundations for bridges, other aspects. As an example, the short runway at Philadelphia International is basically sitting on muck. That's my formal term. And they actually had to put wick drains under that entire thing so it would settle in time. Well, that was part of my responsibility, to work out the details, how to get it done, as well as help build it. But it just involves all kind of teamwork with engineers to get things done. Next on the major slope stability and dam stability.
Major what?
Major slope stability, and then landslide and dam stability project. Number of projects where evaluating dams or surfaces for its general stability or even after the fact. I did a number of projects with FEMA after there'd been a failure, he had to go in and figure out, all right, is it stable? Can we bring it stable with an affordable amount? Because FEMA has very specific rules about what they'll pay for and what they won't. And then general dam evaluation. My most recent one though was 2011, where new specifications for dam spillways was required. So up in Pottsville, we had to basically rebuild part of the dam. My job was to dewater the dam. It was quite, it was leaking, to say the least. And we had to dewater it so we could stabilize it and rebuild the spillway. So that kind of encompasses that. And then,
Excuse me, Gary?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Sure.
Could you do me a favor, could you put the mic a little closer?
A little closer, okay.
When cars go by, it's hard to hear.
Oh, okay, all right, sorry about that. Okay, large-scale environmental assessments. As you might imagine, there's
Large-scale environmental
assessments.
assessment, thank you.
I'll slow down.
What page are you on in your,
I'm sorry?
what page are you?
I'm on page 7.
7?
Yes. I've done a number of evaluations where gas station spills, various issues dealing with usually petroleum products, though some of the airports it was dealing with ethylene glycol, basically the de-icing agents, both design and remedial work. Newcastle County Airport in Delaware had a particular problem because it's basically just a small commercial airport, and all the planes were de-iced, but there wasn't any central location, which was kind of tricky for a while, but we worked it out and did that. And of course, addressing the environmental aspects of what happens to ethylene glycol when it hits the environment, hits the geology, gets kind of tricky. So, all right, working at Philly International, same thing. Also working on a couple of landfills, but basically doing the environmental evaluation of it. Okay, brownfield restorations to wetlands. This was, I was talking about with the wetland biologist. And what it is the 202 corridor going through Bucks County. There's 10 acres of wetlands that was created for it. And she and I basically designed and we built the entire facility, both the water content element and the planting scheme. And it's actually been very successful. Also, for Philly International, back in the late 90s, because they had a bird problem with at the end of the runways, they filled in all the wetlands to get rid of the birds. Unfortunately, they didn't get a permit. So we had to build them tidal wetlands over at the mouth of the Pennypack of the Delaware. But we had to move 370,000 cubic yards of incinerator ash in the process. So you can tell, a lot of in-depth evaluation on that front. Yes, we actually built 12 acres of tidal wetlands. And then picked up the ash, moved it over, and built a landfill next to it. Actually, there's a public park right next to that. So that was kind of an interesting project.
Wait, is that the airport or at Pennypack Park?
It was for the airport, but it was Pennypack is where they did it.
In Northeast?
Yes, at the mouth of Delaware. So, okay, and a series of other kind of wetland designs over time. Vast majority were for either PennDOT, the airport, or some private sector company. I've also worked on a number of landfills. As you might imagine, the concept design for building a brand new landfill is heavily, there's all kinds of work up front, not just hydrogeological, but engineering design and all that. And I've been involved in a number of large ones. And then I've done a certain amount of legal consulting, usually when it was tied into a particular project. I don't solicit myself as generally an expert, but whenever it's needed. And I've done lots of hydrogeological issues, Schrin landfill, another quarry, and then a few of the things dealing with karst. Karst is sinkhole country, all right? You got issues, whether it's collapsing a road, collapsing a building, or something like that. Who's responsible? How do we mitigate it? How do we remediate it?
Slow down.
By
What were those last words, remediate or whatever?
remediate or mitigate. Remediate is, all right, the collapse happens, takes out some structure, how to fix it, all right, and make it stable. Mitigate was, you go into a site, you're gonna build something, you can figure out, oh, we've got cavities below there, we have to address it. So it's mitigating the problem before it happens. All right, let's see. It's a bit in for that. And then I've done, I teach a continuing ed, the engineering geology section of continuing ed for professional licensure. I've also taught at LaSalle University since 2010, structural geology and hydrogeology, and a few environmental field methods courses. And I've also just taught a structural class for Westchester University. I've got a number of publications, but nothing to worry about. I also sit on several committees. PCPG actually is a professional organization for geologists in this state. 20 years as a board member, president several times. I also sit on the DCNR Citizens Advisory Council to the Parks, as well as Department of Forestry, as well as the Geological Survey. And I'm also the representative geologist to the Act 220 Water Resources Committee for rewriting the state water plan for Pennsylvania, for the Delaware Basin. So, okay, questions?
One last thing. What is hydrogeomorphology? You can hardly say it.
Hydrogeomorphology involves the wetlands where you're actually, too many times people think, oh, if I want to create a spring or create a wetland, I just dig a hole. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. You have to terrace things, you have to work it out. Designing how to actually make the general water table turn into a spring, that's the hydrogeomorphological aspect to it. Geomorphology is geology of landforms, so hydro into landforms. That's what that involves. So.
And also, I understand that you are knowledgeable about and conduct something called fracture trace analysis. Is it correct? Explain what that is and how it might be relevant to this site.
Okay, in structural geology, all right, aerial photography is a wonderful tool, all right? It involves both the USDA and Department of Agriculture and US Geological Survey do aerial photographies, but it's not just like Google Earth. It's stereo pairs. The plane flies over, takes a picture, takes another picture from a different angle, and you can actually get three-dimensional projection of the surface, all right? Fracture trace analysis is when you get the linear features that are in the geology, in the rock, all right? They do manifest themselves on the surface. Sometimes it's not so obvious when you walk through it. But in the aerials, there's tonal changes, there's other structural features that stand out. And what those are is those are basically cracks in the rocks, all right? And when you're looking for water, in Pennsylvania, we don't have South Jersey, which you got lots of sand, and that's where you get the water out of the sand. Here, our water's in the cracks in the rocks. So when you're looking for water, you need to find the cracks in the rocks, okay? In this particular project, because of its geology and everything else, it's critical to know where those cracks are if you want to find the water. So that, in summary, that's what a fracture trace analysis is. The weakness planes in the rock that you can follow. It's not just water supply, but contaminant migration. You know, obviously, if the water's going there and you put a pollutant in there, it's going to follow that feature. So that's generally what an FTA is.
Gary, assuming that you will be accepted, which I know has not yet occurred, as an expert geology with various subspecialties which you have just been describing, can you tell us now, do you, based on your specialized knowledge, skill, experience, and training, and the review of the facts and evidence gathered so far in this matter, will you have an opinion on whether or not the granting of this special exception will have an impact on the water resources, both ground and surface, to the neighboring properties, whether that be positive, negative, or neutral?
Yes, I will have an opinion.
Is it your opinion and conclusion in this regard, based accepted in the field.
Yes,
And do you hold these opinions with reasonable certainty?
yes,
So I move this honorable board to consider Gary M. Cribbs' complete resume and to accept him as an expert in this matter, subject to obviously any questions and review. Thank you.
Mr. Cribbs, I've reviewed your CV. I read all of that. You have a great deal of experience in many aspects of hydrogeology. I was going to say this, but you've already told us. Your CV goes on for 11 pages spelling out your hydrogeological experience. And that's, you don't have to answer that. That's exactly what you just said. But I do not see any mention of the design, permitting, or monitoring of large-scale projects for the disposal of treated sewage or treated sewage effluent using drip irrigation. That's not one of your subspecialties, is it?
I would not be involved in the design of drip irrigation.
Excuse me, sir, I asked you a question that's susceptible to a yes or no answer. I'd appreciate a yes or no answer, and then you can explain whatever you want.
No,
But you're not going to dance me around with long answers. Okay?
no,
So the answer is no. So while you do not have any specialized experience in the design, permitting, and monitoring of community sewage disposal systems, particularly those involving the disposal of treated effluent by drip irrigation, you accepted this assignment anyway, didn't you?
yes,
And you have criticized the work performed by the sewer engineer Ebert, the soil scientist Valentine, and the hydrogeologist Clark, haven't you?
yes.
So let's look at your report. On the first page of your report,
I'm
in
not
fact,
sure how this relates to his credentials.
you put it all in issue, whether or not he has used the right methodology. You did it. You told us he's done all the right testing. He's done all of the. It's all in accordance with generally accepted scientific methodology. I have the right to cross-examine him. Whether you ask that or not, I have the right to cross-examine him.
Hang on, objection. Hang on. Go ahead. You can respond to that. Go ahead.
Okay, oh,
We can certainly further respond to what Mr. Cribbs has done in greater detail to address your concerns.
Yeah.
My only point was, we haven't yet begun to address his technical report. So I simply said and asked if he would have an opinion regarding the topics in it based on what he's done, and he said yes. So I don't mind you examining his credentials in any way you see fit.
Well, I will just say this to you, and I have the case sites. You can't qualify an expert just by saying he's got experience. You have to demonstrate that he has particularized knowledge about the subject matter and that he has used recognized scientific methodology to get to his, excuse me. And I have the right to challenge his ability to testify if he does not meet those two criteria. So you understand, Doug, that's where I'm going.
Well,
I'd like
we
to-
believe he will have it, and in fact, his report will show your people don't have it, is what is really going on here.
Hang on. Sorry. Mark, I think he'd be able to testify certainly to, I understand what your objection is as far as him being able to testify specifically with respect to a community drip irrigation system. I get that completely. But I certainly think he'd be able to testify, or he's qualified to testify about fracture trace analysis and any effect that he believes it would have on wells and things like that, right? I certainly think I've heard, at least from what was laid out, that he'd be able to testify about that. Now, how that relates to the drip irrigation is a completely separate subject, and I get what you're saying. If he doesn't have any specialized knowledge in that particular subject,
Chad, I would like to cross-examine him. I have Judge Levitt's statement that credentials alone do not make an expert.
I agree. I agree with you about that.
Obviously, a very well-qualified hydrogeologist. I see my client's names in his portfolio, but I have the right to delve into what did he do specifically to
with respect to this project.
In this project.
I guess my question is, I just don't want to put the cart before the horse. I get what you're saying, because if you qualify him, yeah.
It's not a question, and this is in the cases, it's not a question of credibility. It's a question of competence to testify. He is an expert, but I want to know whether he's followed the right scientific methodology to give an opinion that he said he's going to give.
He's going to ask these questions anyway, Doug. He's permitted to, he's permitted to do that. I get his point about specifically, it's to admit him as a hydrogeologist, right? An expert in the field of hydrogeology.
In regard to the issue before us.
And I think when you read his report and hear his testimony, it will be very clear. He fully understands it and has very clear and professionally based
Why don't
opinions.
you let me cross-examine him except
When you get to the report, you don't want the report to come in because of all the damage it does to your people.
You know, you can make all those noises.
Yeah, well-
It's time to put up, you put a witness on, let me cross-examine him, and
Go right
if he's got the
ahead.
qualifications, then fine.
All right, go ahead, go ahead.
Redirect. Go ahead.
Could you read back the answer to the last question? I asked him, and you have criticized the work performed by Ebert and Valentine and hydrogeologists, and I don't remember his answer.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So, Mr. Cribbs, let's look at your report. On the first page of your report, excuse me, you're on cross-examination. You're not to be talking to Mr. Lloyd. Well, you're doing the face thing. On the first page of your report, you say that Aon Geoscience was asked by Elliott Greenleaf to evaluate the proposed River Point Logistics Center project for its clients, Sharon Duffield and the Anya Fracks, correct?
Correct.
Talk up.
Correct.
Mr. Cribbs, you do not say what criteria you were going to use in that evaluation, do you?
Not specifically, no.
So you would agree with me, I hope.
May I elaborate on that? Except the title of it, hydrogeological evaluation. That is the criteria for which I am investigating.
Okay. Now you would agree with me that since this proposed system must be permitted by DEP, the proper scientific methodology to evaluate a proposed drip irrigation system is the PADEP process that Mr. Ebert mentioned, isn't it?
Correct.
So I'm going to show you, let me get it.
Yeah.
So, who's keeping track of the exhibit? Do you have
I don't know.
I have, I should be on the second
You,
page of the
you know who
last
was keeping,
exhibit.
Mark, you know who was keeping,
In the last transcript.
you know who was keeping track of it? It was Craig.
Yeah,
That's who it was.
You have it.
Hang on one
Correct?
second, let me check my
Because
notes.
it'll be on the second page of the last transcript.
Mark, you have an extra one? Mark, okay, can I have a copy?
Oh,
Copy,
I'm
sir.
sorry. Excuse me.
That's right.
You can read it on your plane.
That's more exciting.
I'm sure. My book, I have through, I think, 23.
I have 23 is the last one I've seen on mine.
I think this is 24.
Alright. And the title on this is Manual for Land Treatment of Wastewater. Pennsylvania DEP Guide to Site Selection, Site System Design and Permitting Requirements.
So I've given you a copy of the DEP document entitled Manual for Land Treatment of Wastewater, a guide to the site selection, system design, and permitting requirements, which we've marked as A24. Now, Mr. Cribbs, you did not perform the soil classification, conductivity testing, mounding analysis, or loading rate analysis for the angle farm that is required by the DEP process, did you?
No, I did not execute those.
I'm sorry?
No, I did not execute those.
Okay.
What were those again, Mark? Soil classification,
Conductivity testing, mounding analysis, or loading rate analysis. So now I would like to know what you did to prepare for writing your report. Did you read Mr. Clark's hydrogeological report?
Yes, I did.
Did you read Mr. Valentine's soil evaluation report?
Yes, I did.
Did you read the PADEP planning module for the overall sewer project that Mr. Ebert prepared?
Yes, I did.
You were not here for Mr. Ebert's testimony, were you?
No.
And you weren't here for Valentine's testimony or
No.
Clark's testimony? Did you read the transcript of their testimony?
Yes, I did.
Each one of them? Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you visit the site?
Yes, I did.
And tell us about your site visit.
There were 2 site visits, one in May of '23. I did a perimeter evaluation around the property, since I had no permission to go on the Angle property. And then again in May of '24.
You did not do any deep hole test pit excavation to examine and classify any of the soils on the Angle farm, did you?
Correct.
Did you do any soil testing or characterization of your own?
No, I did not.
Chad, I object to the testimony of Mr. Cribbs as an expert in this case, and I'm going to tell you why. I readily admit that Mr. Cribbs is a qualified hydrogeologist, but that only satisfies part of the 2-part requirement to qualify to testify as an expert. I cite you to Judge Levitt's dissenting opinion in Crystal Forest Associates versus Buckingham Township, Commonwealth Court 2004 decision. I have a short quote from that case. On this quote, on this point, the majority acknowledges several deficiencies in Dr. Edelstein's preparation that I find troublesome. Most telling is that Dr. Edelstein never reviewed the ordinance at issue. He also did not conduct, and here's the heart of it, any independent analysis of the economic feasibility of the Keys development, which is the very heart of the case. Dr. Edelstein further admitted that he reviewed only a couple of the transcripts. The majority discounts these shortcomings in light of the experience and accomplishments described in Dr. Edelstein's curriculum vitae. And here's the heart of her opinion. However, impressive credentials, standing alone, do not an expert make. The proffered experts in 3 cases that she cited all had similar achievements, but like Dr. Edelstein and Mr. Cribbs, very little knowledge of the specific facts and issues in those cases. This is not, as the majority suggests, merely an issue of the credibility and the weight to be accorded to Dr. Edelstein's testimony. The extent to which Dr. Edelstein has studied the ordinance and the economic feasibility of McKay's development plan unquestionably went into his competency as an expert witness. Mr. Cribbs, like Dr. Edelstein, is very qualified in his field. But the very heart of this case is whether or not the proposed system satisfies the applicable scientific criteria. The applicable scientific criteria in this case is the PADP protocol. And Mr. Cribbs did not perform his own independent investigation to determine if the proposed system satisfies the PADEP criteria. So he has not qualified, he's not qualified to opine on the heart of this, which he's agreed is, do we comply with the permitting requirements of DAP?
Are you contesting that? Are you contesting that they comply with the DEP requirements?
Yes.
Well, how is he gonna?
We think they,
If he didn't review any of it.
he reviewed it all. They don't want to hear the results of his review of the facts they did present and didn't present. This is nonsense.
Not nonsense.
It's a dissenting opinion, not the majority opinion.
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
What he's saying is that somebody who didn't do the underlying work, who wasn't hired by the applicant, can't make comments on the quality of their work, then no one can be an opposing expert. That's point one. The second thing is, we believe this board's duty, with all respect, is quite different than the duty that the DEP has with regard to this.
No, I agree with you on that issue. What I'm saying is that how are you contesting if this expert was not hired to do an analysis, which I think he testified to, and we can read it back if you want. I think he said he was not hired to do analysis to determine whether or not it complied with the DEP requirements. I think you said that, right? That's correct. He's saying that's correct. So that, to me, if he wasn't hired to do that and didn't do that, how is he going to testify about something he wasn't hired to do as an expert?
I think that's a miscommunication between what he was hired to do. He was hired to evaluate this site.
In the context of whether or not it meets the requirements for special exception. Right. That is potentially something different, which I think you said, Doug. That is something different than what the DEP requirements.
That's right.
Okay.
And I didn't introduce the DEP requirement.
I'm sorry.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Say it again.
I understand what you're arguing. He was hired to provide an analysis and opinion based on the impact that it would have on groundwater, well water for neighboring properties. That's right,
Drainage,
right?
correct.
I don't think that is the same thing as being hired as to determine whether or not the site, independent of all of those other things, I don't think that means the same thing as being hired to
I
do an
agree.
analysis on what, okay.
I
All
agree
right,
with that.
then he's admitting, he's not contesting that you comply with that, I think.
No, I am contesting
That he complies with the DEP standards?
that's correct.
Okay, okay.
How
I don't think
And
he
that
can
may
testify
only,
about
that may only, we went through 4 days of testimony from all of their people about how they complied or believe they complied with the PADEP. There's no DEP approval yet of any of that.
Agreed.
It may be subject to appeal before the Environmental Hearing Board, et
Certainly.
cetera, where those details will be examined. What he was retained to do, and we have a separate soil scientist and sanitary engineer to look at some of the technology and the implications of it that they've testified about. Mr. Cribbs was hired specifically to look at the implications of water on the property and where it would go, and if more water was added, where that would likely go, surface or to water, groundwater resources.
Without
That's
doing any testing of the property?
You don't need to test to know that. There's thousands
I
of
think
documents.
I don't know.
I
I don't know what he did yet, Mark. I don't think anybody knows what he did yet.
Let me respond to what Doug just said. What he was hired to do, what he described, what Doug just described, is exactly what DEP, the DET protocol, provides for and requires. It's to do all the testing, whatever those words you were about, enough water or not enough water. All of the DEP protocol is designed to protect the aquifer, the wells, everything that Doug just said this gentleman was hired to evaluate. But if you don't do the testing that complies with the protocol by DEP, how do you have the right to issue an opinion?
I mean, I certainly think they could critique methods that were used, right? And whether or not they legally comply with DEP. But listen, isn't it a credibility issue if you didn't do any?
No, that's my point. And that's exactly.
Well, I did hear him say, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but I did hear him say he did, a lineal trace analysis. Is that right?
I'm sorry.
I did hear him say in the opening that he did do a lineal trace analysis. Is that
It's
right?
not part
Yes.
of the DEP
I'm
process.
not saying it is, Mark. I'm not saying it is.
He has looked at their data. He has determined whether, and he has opinions on whether their data was properly collected, whether it was properly displayed, whether it was recorded at all, whether things are accurately portrayed in their diagrams. They put it into evidence before this board. He's now trying to say somehow we have to pretend we're the DEP, and the only thing that counts is whether somehow they're making an application to the DEP when it's not been accepted yet. It's not appealable.
I understand that. It's a
Testing
completely
was
separate issue.
accepted.
That's a
The
completely
testimony
separate issue.
is that the DEP.
We don't know that, and it certainly hasn't
There was a
passed
test.
administrative review.
All right. I mean, we almost have to do this question by question objection though, because I'm not even sure what would fall under whether or not I don't know.
What I don't understand.
I get what you're saying. But what?
Can I ask a question for clarification for me? Mr. Kaplan, what I believe you're saying, bear with me on my language, is that the witness, Gary, should not be qualified because he has not followed this DEP protocol? Is that what you're saying?
No, he's saying that.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
In Doug's qualification for Mr. Cripps, he said to him, did you follow, I'll use, I think the word, generally accepted scientific methodology? That's what he asked him.
Okay.
And that is a very important question. The scientific methodology in this case, sir, is the DEP criteria. I've gone through it. This. It tells you specifically what to do in each step. And if Mr. Cribbs did not go in there and look at the soil morphology by going into the hole, did not look at where the perched water was, did not do the permeability testing, then how can he criticize what was done and testified to? Because he's got 40 years of experience? Well, that's not enough. So my answer to your question is yes, you've got to qualify, you have to use recognized scientific methodology. That's it. He admitted he didn't do it. I don't see how he testifies.
And Doug, what is the reply to that?
I guess it's severalfold. First of all, this is not a DEP hearing per se. You have different responsibilities, including issues of valuation and potential impact. You are looking at the impact of this project on your neighbors. If the DEP protocols cover it wonderfully and they get a permit and it's not appealed, then that may be part of the process, but it's not your direct responsibility, one. Secondly, nobody but the applicant can produce the information he's asking about.
I offered it to you months ago and you turned it down.
And we looked at it in your report.
You were
Mark.
offered it months ago and you turned it down.
Mark, in exchange for, first of all, in exchange for us giving you our reports, which we hadn't prepared as yet. You did offer that. We thought all of that was what you reported on in your application index, the first package you gave us, which was the Ebert report, then the Valentine report, and then the Clark reports with all the charts and data. So not only did Mr. Cribbs review all of them, now he is not the engineer on the sanitary side of it, or talking about all aspects of soil, other experts would. He is looking at the hydrogeologic implications of everything that you gave us in those reports. So that's what he's about to testify on, whether he thinks some of it is valid or other parts are subject to question.
But he didn't do a conductivity test and he didn't do a mounding analysis. What did he do? What methodology did he use?
Hang on.
I'd like to be heard on both.
Okay.
So, I don't know your notes, but you cited to Crystal Forest Associates versus Buckingham Township, right?
I did.
And that majority decision states, in Pennsylvania, the test to be applied when qualifying an expert witness is whether the witness has any reasonable pretension to specialized knowledge on the subject matter under investigation. That's the standard, not whether he did it. That's the credibility issue. And the majority in that decision, a Commonwealth Court decision, goes on to say qualification of an expert rests within the sound discretion of the trial judge and absent abuse of discretion, and that's the appealable decision. So we're talking about qualifications. Everything that Attorney Kaplan has talked about is critiquing what he did in his report.
Or didn't
That's
do.
what you do.
Or didn't do.
Or didn't do in his report. That's what we do with every expert.
Yeah.
It's not qualifications. Qualifications is, does he have the expertise and does it require that he follow DEP management? The dissenting opinion is not something that should be used to qualify.
It's the president judge in 2004.
Okay.
And there is, are you really going to tell me there was a question that anybody that's an expert can testify on a particular subject without qualifying that he knows and looked at or didn't use the right science? That's ridiculous.
Now, what's ridiculous
but
is
then,
you say
hang-
it has to follow your method that you pick. Whether he's qualified to do it and whether he did it are two different, completely different issues.
I think I agree. I think he's qualified as a hydrogeologist, so.
One of the good guys.
Procedurally, I think it's up to you, Doug.
We're ready to proceed if you're accepting them.
Yeah, we just did that.
All right.
Gary, can I ask a quick question, please?
Go ahead.
There's an acronym here under hydrology that's PAGWIS.
PAGWIS. It's the Pennsylvania Groundwater Information System.
I missed it. Say it again.
Pennsylvania
If-
Groundwater Information System. It's handled by the Topographic Geological Survey.
I'm
With all
sorry,
the
handled
wells.
by the,
Topographic and Geological Survey.
Let me first just mechanically. I handed all members, including a double document at first. I said Mr. Cribbs's resume would be RI-10, I believe, and then his report is the one following it. Let's mark that as I-11, and I think I've given that to all the parties. So, Mr. Cribbs, would you bring your report? That's,
Okay, thank you.
Would you tell us how you went about conducting your review of this site and what elements provided by the applicant you reviewed and what field work you did and what other types of technical resources you referred to undertake your assessment process?
Okay, the first thing I do in a project at all is pull up all the references on the geology. All right. There's a number of publications on it. Miller et al., which is a county report, full details of all the geology and the interpretation of it. Also, there's one by Poth from 1972. He focused on the hydrogeological aspects of Lehigh and Northampton counties. And then, of course, there's Drake et al. From 1969, which, once again, did a lot of the structural aspects as well as the geology. And actually embellished on some of the glacial issues on that. But you pull up all that data set, read through it to understand what you're dealing with, all right? Next thing is, and oh yeah, I just realized, the PA Geode is a database done by the Topographic Geologic Survey of all the geological references in the state. It's just a website, you call it up and you can get the basic geology that's underneath your property. That's what I used underneath figure 2. Then I also went into the inventory which I mentioned, which is PAGWIS, which is, once again, it's operated by the Geological Survey, and it's all the wells in the state, all right, since time began. However, the only problem with that is it's not necessarily up to date, more recent wells, because it's, there's no teeth in it. You can't get in trouble if you're a well driller and you don't turn in your reports. It's basically up to you to turn them in. So it doesn't always get updated as frequently as you like. But for example, one of my figure 6 is all the surrounding wells that are within that database. So you get a good idea of what the density is, and of course in this area, just about everybody's on wells.
Gary, can I stop you just a moment? You've referred to 2 figures. Will we take a moment to allow the board members to see where to find them in your report? I think you referred to figure 2, and then relate that to the source, and then go to your figure 6.
Okay, just
Figure 2, I would tell what page it's on.
to be thorough, figure 1 is just a location map, topographic map, all right? Just the subject areas and the topography. And that was page 7,
subject areas and
topography.
topography.
Let me stop you here. When we look at a drawing like this was not, you may have laid or put an overlay on it, but where does the underlying document or drawing come from? Is that a source material, and if so, what source?
This is a USGS 7.5 minute quad. It's actually within the PA Geo database. You just call it up and it appears in front of you. Okay. Figure 2, which is page 8, once again, is the geode, only it's the geology laid out with the positions of the drain field and the 2 others that were at least discussed early on in the project. And then ultimately,
I'm sorry, figure 2 is what are the 3 things, the 3 red marks?
The large one is the drip irrigation general area. The one to the right, immediate right, is that other drain field that was discussed. And then the one to the upper left is the one that was discussed in a trade, though it's an obsolete location.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Discussed in the trade.
There was a discussion of the township needing extra sanitary systems, and it's in the park. There was a talk of that. I guess
got it.
it's fallen away, all right, so I just, but just, as a point of reference, it's there.
Doc, once more. I have larger copies of all those. Would that be helpful for the board to have a larger copy? I don't think it needs to be separately marked because it's in the underlying.
It's identified as the figure.
And I'll do the same with the back. You know me while I'm doing it, I'll just do the next one.
This is figure 2 of his report.
Figure 2.
Oh, yeah, it's part of that. It's figure 2 of that.
Don't worry about it.
No, here. There's more. And this- Okay, figure 6 is the PAGWIS, the database with all the wells, but DEP has put them on their own EMAP program. It's a simpler way to show all the wells that are surrounding. The red oval is our general drip irrigation area, and the blue dots are all wells that are within the database system.
Let me just stop. Wells, residential wells, commercial wells, what kind of wells?
It's all the wells right now, okay?
Please speak into the mic.
Please, sir, can you use the mic? Can you speak? We don't
Sorry.
hear. Thank you.
Sorry. Figure 6 is a diagram of all the wells in the immediate area. Okay?
I interrupted your discussion of what you've been looking at and analyzed in order to do this work. I'm sorry, I interrupted your discussion. Why don't you continue telling us what you looked at and assessed that you did your work?
Okay.
Are all these wells from the same aquifer?
Pretty much. The ones that are municipals are usually in the very deeper wells,
So
which
all of these dots basically share the same,
pretty much. The
better word, water generation, water.
correct. The PAGWIS system actually has a spreadsheet that has every well that's documented, its depth, its characteristics, and everything else. Most residential wells are no deeper than about 200 feet, all right? The commercial wells and the municipal wells are usually in the 400 to 500 foot deep and are a much productive aquifer. The shallow ones, productive.
Right. No,
Yes.
say after that.
Aquifer.
Okay,
Aquifer. Whereas the domestic wells, it's unfortunate because this particular rock formation is quite tight. Remember I said that the water's in the fractures? There's lots of fractures. The trouble is, they're just not very open. They're kind of tight, so it doesn't produce a lot of water. It will allow contamination to move, it just takes a lot of time. That's the big difference.
Let me ask that intervening question. Does the DEP report or the other report show the depth of these wells?
Of the domestic wells, no. The only depth reference in any of the reports that I reviewed was the hydrogeological report, and it was the monitoring wells, and they ranged
It was the monitor.
monitoring wells, and they ranged from 45 feet to 77 feet.
You're referencing the monitoring wells that the applicant.
The hydrogeological Clark's report. All right. Next, I go to the fracture trace analysis, because obviously I'm interested in where the water is, where it's going, what its potential is. I conducted one, and that's figure 4. Well, they're handing it out, and we'll look at it. I'll touch base. Yeah,
Just a real basic question.
Go ahead.
When you're talking about the fracture trace analysis, the fracture is limited water, are you talking about water going up or water going down?
either way,
Both.
both, yeah.
I have a question for you.
Shoot.
How accurate is this map? When is this updated?
I'm sorry, which one?
The it's labeled figure 7, but it's actually figure 3. I-11 figure 3.
What do you have all the well dots?
The one with all the well dots.
Oh, 7.
Oh, that's
Figure
6.
Figure 6. Yeah.
That's figure 6.
Figure 3 of I-11.
They try to update it every year as the new systems come in. They update them.
Sure.
You know, the trouble is they usually have to have an intern do it.
Right.
You know.
When you made the comment about these are all the wells that are on record. So I guess kind of water that down for me. How are wells not on record?
Well, see, remember, it's an honor system between the drilling companies.
Sure.
Okay? If they fill out the paperwork, if they sort of like delay it, they're so busy they can't get it in,
Sure.
there's no penalty for that. There's no ramifications.
Yep.
It's a frustrating aspect of the state geologist.
And you're saying the municipality doesn't report it? You didn't get a well permit?
Well permit, but that database, that sheet that they fill out usually isn't required. There's a few counties that do it. I know Chester County does it, Montgomery County's bringing it on board, but there's a lot of others that it sort of gets lost in, and that's the problem, is you don't know what you're missing right now.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Actually, before I explain figure 4, want to hand out figure 3? 3, which is the geology map. Figure 3 is mainly meant to illustrate the complexity of this area. All right. You know, you look at the geology map and you see that just, one rock type in the general area. Everything looks rather simple. This whole mess of structure in here is folding, faulting, basically thrust systems up and over other, materials. And the Martinsburg is one of those pieces. So it's been contorted, broken, and just, it's a big mess. Why? Because there's a lot of fractures in that system. But I emphasize, and I've done a lot of drilling in this county, especially here, especially in the Martinsburg. Most of the areas, they're fractured, but they're tight, they're closed, or they've been remineralized, which means it doesn't transmit water at all or very slowly. Okay? That's what that diagram was meant to illustrate. Okay, moving on to figure 4, the fracture trace analysis. They're a little difficult to see because of the black and white aspect of the aerial, but, and this aerial is from 1938. These were U.S. Department of Agricultural aerials. It started out as agriculture, basically looking at crops. Trouble is, sooner or later we figured out that you could get a lot more information from it. And geologically, that's what it tells you, because you have this three-dimensional picture. It's a mirrored scope. Basically it looks like binoculars, but it's in a mirrored scope, and you get it 3 dimensions. And you work out all the features that are linear. That's what they represent. And the lower rectangle is the area of the drip field, and it's got several features running out of it, which means there's potential. Go ahead.
Just to clarify, the large rectangle that you have, is that the entire, 80 acres?
88.
88.
Is that the entire 88 acres?
Not
or is-
88, it's a little smaller than that.
But that's not the specific site that they're referencing,
No,
right?
when I created this, I didn't have the exact dimensions of the drip
Okay,
field.
okay.
Okay, but it illustrates you've got quite a few features in the area, and they drain out.
And just to clarify, Mr. Cook, sorry about that. In the other exhibits that you showed, they're in figure 6, and I should have asked this at the time. That oval that you have there, that's the general location of the entire 88 acres or whatever it is, right?
Generally, yeah.
Okay. And same thing with figure 2, the larger rectangle is the entire area, right?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Once
And
again,
then-
it was hard to get a scale.
And then I
accurate.
see a small, it looks like a little, kind of a door handle there, but it's a little square that's within there. I didn't know what
That was the other drip field that they talked about that's just adjacent to the sewage treatment system.
No, you see within
Oh,
that
oh,
large
okay.
rectangle.
That's within the database. If you want to call up the geology, you have to pick a point.
Oh,
And
okay,
I
okay.
picked the
That,
point-
that wasn't identifying something else that you made.
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
Okay. All right, thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, now in looking at the hydrogeology, I go in to explain about aspects of fracture traces. There's a fancy word for that weakness plane in rock.
I'm sorry, say that again?
There's a fancy word called anisotropy. ANISOTROPY. What that basically means is for every fracture, every weakness plane, it's not the same in all directions. In other words, the water might move one way better than it was the other way, all right? Or up and down and everything else. So you have to characterize it differently. The equivalent of that in like a sand aquifer would be isotropic, all right? It's the same in all directions. We don't have that here, okay? But, so we're dealing with the anisotropy in that problem. Okay, and that's got to be factored in when you're looking at the overall hydrogeological impacts of things, okay? Now, I looked at wells within the database. They ranged within that site. There was at least one that went to 320, though that was a commercial well. They ranged from 80 to about 200. They range from 7 gallons a minute to 60 gallons a minute.
Can you refer to pages of your report?
Okay, sorry.
Refer to pages of your report.
Page 2. All right. It's the start of the hydrogeology section. All right. Like I said, we did the fracture trace analysis and tried to understand the interconnectedness of other wells. The one thing I will say is when you've got a well, especially a shallow one, we call it an unconfined aquifer. Unconfined basically means it's atmospheric pressure. There's no extra pressures within it. Okay? The surrounding topography, everything in upper elevation is what contributes the bulk of your water. Okay? This particular site, the high point in that immediate area is the drip irrigation area. It is the source of water for the surrounding wells. Therein lies the big problem, is where we are putting the drip irrigation is the recharge. It's what supplies their water, okay? Doesn't come from anywhere else, doesn't come from the deeper because it's too deep for them to reach it. It's in the shallow aspect of the aquifer. And I go into this. See, I've done a lot of drilling in this area as well as the deeper aquifers. I'm familiar with them. And it's just not productive in the shallow. And that's typical of a well driller. He's going to get the domestic well. He's going to drill whatever it takes to get you minimum 3 to 5 gallons a minute. That's your average faucet rate to satisfy the need. He's not going to drill to 500 feet and double the price for a landowner. Okay? There's no reason to. You don't need that much water. Obviously, commercial, industrial use, different ballgame. Okay? But here, it is the shallow aquifer that impacts all those wells.
Gary, can you stop for a moment and tell the board what types of projects you've done in this county or surrounding counties that have involved you drilling wells or overseeing that work?
Many of my spring water development systems, because
I'm
in
sorry, your what?
spring water development systems, all right? In today's world, FDA, federal drug, yeah. No, wrong acronym, sorry.
Food and drug.
Yeah, thank you. Food and Drug Administration allowed, instead of, used to be you had to have a catchment for a spring to develop spring water, all right? They allowed wells to be installed, provided you could show that it's hydraulically connected to the spring and the water quality basically matched, all right? That was 1995. In all those systems, we drill fairly deep wells, usually in the range of 300, more like 400 in a few places, deep, all right, to hit that confined aquifer water. The reason I drill to that depth is I can shield off the shallow aquifer. I don't need to deal with it to get my water. It is connected to the spring, so we pump the heck out of it, impact the spring so we can show it, and then back off. We don't need all that water. But it's the deeper aquifer. I did one of these developments, 1999 to about 2000 in Totscath. Granted, it's in the Penn Argo formation, but it's an even tighter formation up there. But we went for a deeper structure, and we actually got 400 gallons a minute out of it, but it was between about 325 and 375 down, all right? What was unique about that one, we also went through 160 feet of glacial till. There's a lot of glacial till sitting on top in the farmer's field. It's pretty well, it's shallow bedrock, and I'll get to that in a minute. Yes?
I'm sorry, before we continue, are you saying that the drip irrigation field, as it is laid out now, will affect the aquifer below by not providing enough recharge for that aquifer? Is that what you said? I
No.
kind of
Sorry,
missed it.
no. Just the opposite. It will be adding volume to the aquifer.
Too much water.
In reality, my opinion,
Sir,
Can we
This
just,
is-
let's let the testimony go through. I mean,
please.
he hasn't even testified.
I'm just trying to understand.
I am, but I know, but I've got to be able to cross-examine him, and I need continuity here.
You do it.
Pick up where you left off.
yes. Okay. Where we are, I think we're up to the irrigation and waste disposal problems that I foresee. Okay, two things. One thing is, this is a shale and slate formation made from mudstone. When it decomposes to its soil state, it goes to a clay. Clays are very impervious, all right? So any of that veneer sitting on top of bedrock, the water's gonna perk down to that point and it's going to stop. And it's unlikely in the deeper parts whether they actually got that close. There are other areas where bedrock's right at the surface. And that's problematic because, once again, the water flows in the cracks. If you've got a section of the surface of bedrock that's shallow, just below the drip system, it's gonna hit that, and it's not gonna go down until it finds a crack to move through. Otherwise, it will go laterally.
It will go
Laterally.
laterally.
The problem with that is we've got a steep slope to the south. And depending on where it is and how big that zone is, it could go and basically breach the surface. Okay, so we're adding water for the recharge. And from my perspective, one thing we have, the volume we're talking about, all right, you're gonna be putting a lot of water in there right now. What happens when it rains? A certain amount of that rainwater is going to try to infiltrate. It can, because the drip irrigation volume is already there. It's already saturated. So where is that gonna go? It's gonna go laterally. So it's gonna break the surface at some point, if it rains hard enough. And of course, our recent precipitation events are a telltale sign. It's like, you know, it's got a pretty high probability of happening. And moving on to the VW consultants report, which is what I believe is what Mr. Valentine testified about. Okay, they talk about. Should I wait?
Yeah, no, I mean, are there questions? Are you gonna ask questions, Doug? Is he just going through his report and reading?
Now, he's going through it, and I'm trying to follow.
Okay, and that's what I'm saying, is this transcript's gonna be a nightmare. Because there are no, I mean, there aren't any questions being asked, so it's a little tough
Right.
to follow, and then,
I have no objection, Chad.
all right.
Okay, in the Exhibit 14, the consultant's report, it talks about, it's a specific set of test pits, and it talks about the characteristics. A number of them had reduxamorphic zones or
Start
bedrock.
again.
Reduxamorphic,
Slow down, Gary.
REDOXIMORPHIC, I think I got it right.
Explain what
I'll get to it. Okay, reduxamorphic. You ever hear about modeling from years of old? Anyway, that's what it is. It's a new name for it. It involves reduction zones and oxidation zones. And what it is, it represents high water table. If you've got those two systems going on, at some point, there was a high water table there. Okay? There's a number of zones in there. The Ebert report also on page 6 and 7, it's got a summary of a lot of the test pits. I think it was something like 28%, yeah, page 3, item 4. 28 of the reported table had reduxamorphic within 3 feet of the surface. So in reality, that's the high water table, not what's displayed in the wells. And I'll get to those in a minute. And then you've also got another 17% where you've got shallow bedrock within that 3 feet. Once again, same problem. It's a limiting zone. All right? That's a regulatory term, but it basically tries to encompass a series of geological and soils conditions where the downward hydraulic conductivity is a fancy term, but it's the percolation of that water. It either stops or goes very, very slowly. And that entire report showed a high percentage of these zones immediately within the drip irrigation area. Okay. Okay. And the thing about the limiting tool, it is, I mean, soil scientists use it a lot and everything else, but so do hydrogeologists. All right? When I do an evaluation, it's my responsibility to figure out how much recharge is going to that aquifer. All right? If I'm going to take water out of there, I got to make sure it's going to be sustainable. And of course, spring water companies, if we dewater it, if we take away all that water, guess what? We don't have a product. So the purpose is figure out, and we deal with this type of these elements in trying to figure it all out. Do a water budget on the bigger picture. So it's an element of our work as well. So basically getting to the groundwater aspects, right now in the Clark report, it's reported that the groundwater high ranges from 3 feet to 19 feet. All right? However, there's one problem with that. When you're doing evaluation of a profile in groundwater, especially in a recharge area, in a stream, it's called a discharge area. The groundwater is coming up and discharging. That's why streams, in a drought, streams continue to run for the most part. In a recharge area, it's going down. So if you drill down into it, the pressure of that water, which is only based on its elevation, but it declines after a period of time. It will recover and start to increase. But my problem with these wells is they're open case. They've got slotted casing in them, but they're open basically from 3 feet to the bottom, all right? To the bottom, okay? So 45 feet up to 77 feet. The problem is, now you're gonna get an average pressure level within that column of water, all right? Want to hand out, Feder? A little diagram that just helps illustrate that point, because it's right out of textbook. That's it, yeah. So you're gonna get an average level, so in essence, because you're getting a lower pressure at the bottom and a higher pressure at the top, it's gonna average out. Then you add in the fact that it's a tight aquifer, it's gonna be very, very slow. So I evaluated, like, the levels we're looking in the monitoring wells are not a representation of the high water table, because they're very inconsistent with the redoxamorphic components in the test pits. And the abundance of those zones is kind of key. Now, if you're faced with doing this as part of DEP regulations and everything else, and I double checked to make sure it was in there, there's something called a piezometer. And what it is basically it's like a well, except you isolate the zone that you're interested in. So you could do a multi-level piezometer so you can figure out what the gradient is. The trouble is, the driller drilled it like he was drilling a supply well. He went for where he could find water, that was it, drilled it down, he's done. The construction methods needed a little more embellishment. And it's cited right in the regulations. And that's one of my points, is didn't follow through with the whole thing, didn't look at the bigger picture.
I'm sorry,
I don't know, which part is he talking about?
I don't know which well he's talking about.
Yeah, well, can you
I'm
specify,
talking-
or Doug,
I'm-
can you help specify what he's referencing, because I'm a little confused there.
I'm talking about all the monitoring system, all
So
the
every
wells.
single monitor well, they didn't do what?
They didn't do multi-level piezometers.
What's the word?
Piezometers. P-I-E-Z-O meter. Piezometers.
You said multi-level design.
And what you do is you put that well casing in at the horizon you want, you bentonite seal it off on either side, but you'll have to put multi-levels because you want to get the deep one as well, and then maybe a middle one or multiple depending on how deep it is. And you can get the head pressure on those different levels. And of course the higher one should be the highest. It should be something a lot more reflective of the redoxamorphic zones. Because all those that they found were shallow. I mean, less than 3 feet. That's a problem. And the reason it's a problem is when you take the mounting analysis, and I'm not challenging the numbers in the mounting analysis, but if you add those mounting numbers to higher water tables, it's going to break the surface in places. And that's my issue, is once again, you're going to take that water and it's going to come to the surface.
Just one moment, what we handed, I think would be marked as I-12. So,
Okay, what that shows is from Feder microphone. It's textbook out of Feder and Kramer. Kramer. K-R-E-A-M-E-R. Okay, what it's showing you is a cross-section of a mountainside to a lake to a stream, all right? And those dashed lines are the head potential of the water, the energy within the water, all right? And the little blue line is a well, trying to illustrate the point that if you drill it down there, you start at elevation 6, past 5, and you're somewhere probably 4.5 or maybe 4.7 pressure head, all right? So you're gonna get an average number in there, not the high. And once again, that's my point, is how things were constructed, it's incomplete. It's not giving you the true story. Okay.
you talk about the test pits. We're going to now proceed to talk about the test pit analysis. Maybe, before we do that, what about the fracture trace? And I want to make it just a reference back to the POTH report. So in the exhibit set you had from, I think, the very early on, had marked as I-5, a section of the POTH report. We have the entire, and I think what it looked like to all of you had a blue cover and 4 pages, I think, were attached to that. If anyone wants to see, the entire report is here, but I didn't print it in a large drawing. But Gary, why don't you tell us what is in that POTH report and how that reflects, it relates to the analysis.
Objection. Let him testify. Stop
No,
leading.
just tell us what the documents we produced as I-5 mean or have, in what way are they relevant to this review?
Okay, the POTH report was the hydrology of the Martinsburg Formation in Lehigh and Northampton counties, Pennsylvania. Okay, the next page is basically a small version of the geology map within that report. The next page is an enlargement of the area, the subject area we're in, all right? And of course, it shows the different formations within it. But the red lines or the maroon lines, those are traces. Those are fracture traces. Very similar to mine. Does not look all that similar to Mr. Clark's page, I think it's figure 2 in the Clark report. And one comment I have about Mr. Clark's fracture traces in the binder.
So if you,
The fracture traces within Mr. Clark's report.
I think what Mr. Cribbs is referring to would be the Clark report in the figure 2 in the Clark report, which appears as number 14 in Mark's binder. So if you wish to, and it's this drawing here, that turquoise or light green drawing.
Well, I'm going to object to this because my recollection is that Mr. Clark's report does not cite any fracture trace analysis.
That's the problem, maybe. Let's hear about it.
If you look at the legends on that drawing, right at the bottom, big blue line, fracture trace. So he did the fracture trace analysis. All right?
Fracture trace
Analysis.
Or the document had that on it.
Excuse me?
You said he, Clark, did a fracture trace analysis. He didn't testify to that. He didn't say it in his report. What are you talking about?
I'm talking about his diagram, which is pretty much hand-drawn. What's that? Then I would ask the question what they represent.
Well, just refer again to where that text appears and what lines you're referring to.
Can you please use the microphone?
Gary, just refer in detail to figure 2, the lines and the color that are identified as fracture traces to your mind. And that can be disputed later if the applicant wishes to.
Okay. You gonna say
He can't
something?
testify about something that wasn't testified to about. He can't reference that they were if that wasn't the evidence that was presented.
It's the evidence in their drawings. They gave us this as a drawing showing what appears to be a fracture trace that
Good.
penetrates in one.
Did you confirm that on cross? What that was?
Why do I need to? I asked about the fracture traces.
Did you ask if that document showed?
Yes,
fracture-
I did,
And what
and
did
I
he
asked
say?
about whether it was consistent with the POTH report on this. I don't remember the exact answer now, but was told that that wasn't relevant. We think it's very relevant. So this is a diagram.
Now, here we've
The
got the
appli-
lawyer testifying again. This has got to stop.
Go ahead, finish, Doug.
we are given a document by the applicant, and now we're told we can't question it or inquire into it or say there's some inconsistency in it.
Right, but you're gonna suggest now that it shows fracture trace analysis, which was not testified to on direct. And you didn't, it wasn't clarified on cross, that it was. I mean, I don't, you're gonna say it wasn't, he's gonna say it was. You're gonna say it was, that they are fracture trace analysis, and he's gonna say it wasn't. How are we gonna allow that?
What we're going to seek to say
Or at least
is
with
what
respect it is. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
the broader technical basis of it, that the known knowledge about this topic is broader than what is displayed on the map, and that in some ways this is shortchanging the board in what it's being told about the fractures, that's all.
Then why
That it's a
wasn't
more
there
complicated
cross-examination
process than
for
this
that?
drawing shows. It's as simple as that.
I mean, you're gonna get a chance to rebut with it, so I don't, yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask which
I'm
map are you talking
I
about?
think you said 14?
14, but
No,
what map are you
no.
talking about?
It is figure 2 in the Clark report.
Which is A14, I think you said.
Oh, I don't know why Gary was saying, it might be page
Okay,
14
go
overall.
ahead,
Yeah,
let's go on.
okay.
Okay, basically,
Mike, there's
Yeah,
two
you
mics
have
for you
two.
for each of you now, please.
now I've got a separate one. Good.
There we go.
Just stop moving it. All right, the POTS report shows traces in the general area of the drip irrigation field, okay? I will note, if you really look hard, and in figure 2, they're called fracture trace, all right? They are only in topographic valleys. Valleys, okay? The trouble is, nothing in the POTS report is that way, nor is any of that in my fracture trace analysis, all right? The problem is, at times, you can have a trace in a valley. That's true. However, with the glaciation that went across this site, it's difficult to say those valleys are there. And the blue lines on this diagram are only in topographic valleys. And what I'm saying is it's inconsistent. It's not giving you the big picture, all right? Which allows aspects of that drip irrigation to escape the area downhill towards those domestic wells. All right? They are, if the water quality isn't what they hope, anything like that, or something else enters the picture, those wells are at risk. Anybody's wells are at risk.
Objection. It assumes something that's not in evidence. There is not one single bit of evidence to say that the wells will not produce exactly what my client said. There's no evidence that these wells will, or I'm sorry, that our drip irrigation system will discharge toxins or whatever he's talking about. He can't make that allegation without a foundation that there's something wrong with what we've described.
I mean, I think he's described I think he's described the tight fracture traces. I think he's described a couple of different things, the clay, the things like that would allow the water to, I guess, flow downhill is kind of what the suggestion is. So I'll overrule the objection, at least with respect to that. I mean, that's what he's suggesting. It's gonna, I don't know to what extent or what he did to reach those conclusions, but I mean, I think what he's testified to is that there are a few things that he was saying that would affect it.
May I respond to that?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, the evidence that I presented is the topographic high, the surrounding wells, topographic high, okay? The surrounding wells, they're in the shallow aquifer. Sorry, hydrogeologically, that's true. Mr. Clark said otherwise. He thought it was down, their water was coming from the deeper. The deeper is so much deeper than their wells, it's crazy.
On that issue, let me ask you that. If
Sure.
they were deeper wells, they would not be drawing from the shallow aquifer?
They probably would be drawing from the shallow and the deep.
Okay.
all right? You don't normally case off good water, all right? If it were a commercial well, yeah, I'd probably include both. Okay,
But
but,
I'm talking
Go ahead.
in terms of impact on the property. I'm
Right.
asking, I guess, if it was a 300-foot well, would this runoff that you're suggesting have any impact?
it may have it, but it might be
I'm
diluted.
Maybe
gonna
less.
object. He's got
Yeah,
no
okay.
information. He didn't check his own client's wells. How can he testify to this?
I think that's what, I think, Mark, I think that's your argument. I mean, I think that's your argument. I agree with you, but I.
Because 40 years of drilling wells and everything else and impact on that,
Right.
all right? This is a straightforward fundamental aspect of wells and hydrogeology.
And it's absolute black horn letter law that an expert that just gets up and says, I give you my opinion because of my 40 years of experience, is inadmissible. It's called Ixit Dixit. It's inadmissible.
Okay. Okay. All right, moving on, go ahead. Distribute it. One thing I would like to show,
Let's do them on the last.
all right.
We're gonna move on to the discussion of the test pits. And I've got I think this would be I-13, but let's call them A, B, and C because they're a series. If, we'll just show you where they're coming from. So this would be what I-13A.
Is this part of his material?
Sure.
Our material, okay.
And then ours. I'll tell you where this originates in a moment. Right. Let me just mark this one as,
I don't know where he's at.
what did I say, 13, I-13A. Would you do that? Yeah, okay. So this would be I-13B.
No, that's good.
No one following the C.
Okay, I-13A is the master utility plan by Dynamic Engineering. The lower left-hand corner is the
Which exhibit are you on?
I-13A. Lower left-hand corner is the drip irrigation area. And the test pits.
Can we identify them more specifically than lower left-hand corner? Just, are they marked somewhere?
Down here.
Okay, do you want, okay.
The problem we had was it's so tiny you can barely see it, which is why we enlarged it.
So that's the entire subject parcel is what you're referring to? On the
Pretty
lower
much.
left, okay.
Okay.
And what's the circles?
I'll get you.
What document was that in? Which report? Was that the first?
Okay. Can I hear?
What? Oh, sorry. There's B.
Okay. B is an enlargement, so you can read the pit numbers.
What, not
The pit numbers, the test pit numbers. And C, the circled areas. Now, keep in mind, there was a summary of test pits in the VW Consultants report, and another summary in the Ebert application package. Okay? However, these circled areas, there's no data set for those.
There's what?
There's no data set for those. It's not in any of the packages. And interestingly enough, look at where they sit. They're in our area. Why? Why don't we have that data set?
why do we have that data?
Data set.
Which you gotta identify the one specifically.
It's the one circles. Like, for example,
I can't see anything, sir.
13C.
Look at 13C.
13C, that's not it.
the one circle.
Well, which one is
Okay.
the, okay, circle.
All the ones that are circles, we don't have data for. And I just simply ask why. If there was a pit done in that area, why don't we see any results? Normally, when you do any kind of testing, even if it doesn't go your way, you present it. And you work around it.
And these were the test pits.
Test pits.
Just so I could get one thing. The reports indicate there were 45 test pits.
Correct.
Are these the 45 test pits?
The others all check out.
Pardon?
They have the others all check out.
No, is this whole, what you show here on B, I think it's C,
See,
Yeah.
is that the 45 test pits?
It seems to jive, but you tell me that.
I'll tell you on cross-examination, you'll hear it.
We, as best we could, starting with I-13A, showed where they were first presented as test pits by the applicant. So that's this corner, the small diagram shows where all the test pits were. That's the only test pits we're concerned about. So the first step we did,
Objection to,
Mark, you asked
no,
about.
but he's gotta testify to what happened.
he's got to testify,
You're-
not you.
All right, I thought he did, but go ahead, Gary, go through this.
Basically, we asked, because in any of the other data presented, we wanted to have the general locations.
Describe what we're looking at here so that everybody's clear.
I'm getting there.
Okay,
We
okay.
asked for the specific locations, because previously any document we had was so small. We couldn't tell what it was, couldn't read them, all right? Fortunately, when that document came by, we could enlarge it, so we could actually read the numbers. So we could see where the test pits, which ones were where. Okay? And the ones that are unmarked actually checked out. That number is on the table.
Let's start back, let's start. So what you're saying, just so I can clarify, and I'm gonna ask you the questions.
Sure.
The corner here, and you're saying I-13A was an exhibit from
Yes.
the applicant's report,
Yes.
correct? Regarding the hydrogeology test, right?
Well, the test pits of that
Correct.
element.
And the test pits are in the bottom left-hand corner in that kind of cutout section.
Correct.
That's where the test pits were identified. And then B, I-13B that you've identified, that is a blow-up of that corner section.
That's correct.
All right. And then what you did with I-13C is what you're saying here, is that you took that blow-up and then circled the bore holes, or the well, or not the wells,
The
test
test pits.
pits that were not, that you didn't, that data wasn't provided for.
Correct.
Okay. And his question was, does I-13C, does that represent where the wells or the test pits were located?
Well, I can't tell you that.
That was his question to you, right? Yes.
Yes.
You're saying that based on what you reviewed and you pulled from I-13A,
Right.
that you then blew up to I-13B,
Right,
to get to you to I-13C,
Right.
you then just circled those sections that you did not have borough or
Right.
test pit data for.
correct.
Okay, all right, now we're clear.
And I basically say from that is, I'll emphasize again, why? Why don't we have that data set? All right? I'm all ears as to an answer. Okay, moving on from that. Who's this called?
So this would be 14. Is it a 514?
Doug, is this the last part of your, at least direct? I just want to know, just because we could take a 5-minute break.
Well, no, let's take the break. We have a few
Okay.
more minutes.
Okay.
But let me-
Yeah, you can hand those out while we take the break, that's not a problem.
Mr. Cribb, we handed out to all an exhibit that's been marked I-14. Can you explain what it is and what its relevance to this?
I'm going to object. This was not given to us. It was not given to us. It's not part of his report. I'm going to object to its introduction.
We gave you his report, which was what was requested. We were looking for additional documents that might be relevant, just like a U.S. topographic or geologic map is. We thought this had expert material in it. If you want me to call Mr. Cribbs back so you can take more time to think about it and cross-examine him on it, we will do that. But it is a technical reference that we think it's appropriate for him to be able to refer to inform the board of issues important to it.
Was this referenced in his report?
No, it was not.
He can talk about the concept if you don't want to, and then he can simply refer to where technical information could be found on it, and it's here.
Let him testify.
So why don't you
to
talk
it.
about
Yep,
the
let him
concept,
testify to
Mr.
it.
Cribbs, and then give reference at the end to some of the types of, where you would find expert reports or information related to this topic.
Okay. Previously, I talked about when limiting zones are hit and the water can't go down, it goes lateral. Okay? There's a diagram in this report, actually. It's on the front cover as well.
Objection.
Yes, so just talk about the concept first, and then we'll
Okay.
later talk about the concept without referring to the report, how it works.
Basically, it's just what I said before. When you get limiting zones, okay? Sometimes perch zones, infiltrating water hits it, it can't go down, so it's got to go lateral. And when you've got a steep slope on the side, you get breakout, all right? And that concept's pretty prevalent, all right? Actually, I'll get back to some of the aspects of the test pits. The data set in the VW consultant's report, as well as the eBERT application package, had the data set on those test pits, and there were a substantial number of redoxamorphic zones, meaning high water table, all right? In the VW consultant's report, 9 of the 28 test pits had redoxamorphic. However, Mr. Valentine testified, page 3, line 24, that there were no limiting zones. Wait a minute, I'm confused. Either there is or there isn't. And then again, in the EE report, you're talking about same general percentages. High 20s, 70% also were bedrock. These are restrictive zones. These are going to create lateral breakout. And of course, when you've got drip irrigation going, saturating that horizon, and it rains, percentage of that rain always infiltrates into the groundwater. That's the recharge to the groundwater, naturally. Trouble is, you've now saturated it, so it can't go down. So it's going to start to build up. Depending on the intensity and duration of the storm, that infiltrating water is going to possibly create breakouts. That's got to be dealt with. That's got to be addressed. Nothing in any of the reports addressed it.
Would you tell us what kind of professional documents would talk about, where you would go to find resources to describe these restrictive zones?
There's a number of...
Objection. Not in evidence.
You're just
The
gonna-
record is what's into evidence.
I mean, I think he's just going to testify where you could find them.
Right. If one wishes,
Overruled. Go ahead. Let's go.
Basically, there's a Colorado School of Mines in Colorado which is a reputable geological, Colorado School of Mines.
Google?
School of Mines.
School of Mines in Golden, Colorado. Did a publication on stormwater infiltration and mounding and difficulties with it. Okay?
Are there other textbooks? Is this concept talked about routinely in geology textbooks or subspecialties of geology? Where would you find it?
Many hydrogeology textbooks talk about mounding, talked about artificial recharge. You know, when you want to put the water back in the system. The Southwest U.S. has that problem. So there's a lot of textbooks out there. They talk about mounding issues. I feel that, and I'll get back to the hydro report here in a minute. We have a problem is there's more water than that system can really handle. I mean, you're talking about a clayey material, solid bedrock, or tight bedrock, because it's not solid, it's cracked. But the cracks don't transmit water all that well.
You
Yeah.
mentioned mounding.
I'll get to that.
Yeah.
Figure 3. Hydrogeology, figure 3.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Go ahead. What is it, 14? Figure 3?
The page.
No.
Yes, I'm sorry. We're now referring to, in the text, Mr. Clark's report. It would be his figure 3. We looked earlier at figure 2, which was the top one. Now looking at it, we'll comment on figure 3, which is the one below it, and is identified in the report as figure 3 in the upper right.
Figure 3. Groundwater elevation map,
Yeah,
that's figure 3.
yes.
Okay. Believe it or not, I have no problem with figure 3. Groundwater elevation map based on the wells the way they are. That's what it contours out to be. At this point in time, that's where the groundwater's at. Not necessarily the high, but that's where it's at. Now, moving on to figure 4, which when I first glanced at it, I thought it was some kind of a mounding diagram, but apparently it's not. It's supposed to be depth to water after that. The trouble is, if you notice how it looks, many of the contours, the dashed black contours on there, they're perpendicular to the groundwater table. That's impossible. Because the topography doesn't change all that much. Remember, groundwater mimics, he and I totally agree, the groundwater table in this aquifer mimics topography. That's true. This makes no sense, and in my book, it's kind of like, oh, there's plenty of room for mounding, there's no problem. I don't think that's true. I think that's incorrect.
Well, in fact, didn't you have a view of whether that mounding would be breaking the surface?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but you start adding up the redox zones and everything else, you've got in places some of the worst numbers of like 8 feet of mounding. If you translate that over to some of the shallower stuff, it's gonna break the surface, okay? It needs a lot more work, is what I'm trying to say. It is just totally incomplete.
Would you explain that in a little greater detail, Gary, what additional kinds of work need to be done or data supplied?
May I refer to that one?
What?
May I refer to that one?
Which one?
The figure 3 that's in front of you. It's just not, I can hold it up, it's on that.
Which one is that? Figure 3. Does it say figure 3? Let's see where. Oh, yes, it does.
Okay, figure 3. When you mountain the groundwater, what will happen is these elevations, yeah, they'll increase, but you'll bulge.
But you'll what?
They'll bulge, okay? They'll reshape. It's like, I don't like, when you're putting data packages together, you're gonna use elevations all the way across the board. Don't jump between depth to water and that, because it's hard to imagine. But a mounting system within this is going to bulge. and it's just not portrayed that way. And that's why I've got a real problem with it, because it's not taking all those factors into account. And when you consider the test bits that were done and the percentage, and then the ones missing, we don't know why. You guys need more information to really evaluate this properly, and you're not getting it. I hate to say that, but that seems to be the case.
Did you address what you've just discussed in your report, and if so, where would we find it in your report?
All right. The page 4, the overall concerns. It's the second bullet, mounting.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Page 4, overall concerns, second bullet.
Second what?
Second bullet.
Have you reached any conclusion, I think you may have just stated it, but have you reached a conclusion regarding the adequacy, particularly of the Clark report? But if there are collateral references that you need to make to either the Ebert or the Valentine report, please do that.
Yes, basically the Clark report is insufficient to conclusively draw an understanding of the situation. The shallow aquifer is the recharge area and supply side for the local domestic wells. That is pretty obvious. And the inconsistency of the data gap within the test pits, as well as Mr. Valentine's claim that there were no limiting zones when there obviously were. Why doesn't that work out?
Can you give us any pages in his transcript, the testimony of his the transcript of his testimony that would reference your...
Mr. Valentine's statement in his testimony was page 3, line 24. No limiting zones were found.
No what?
No limiting zones were found.
And what about any issues with Mr. Clark's testimony?
He claims that the surrounding wells got their water from somewhere else, implying that it was the deeper aquifer, and I think I've already addressed that, is that likelihood is very low because most of the wells are shallow.
What additional work, if any, would you think is required to adequately characterize the Angle Farm's hydrologic characteristics and likely impacts on its neighbors?
Two things. One, more test pits and focus on the reduxamorphic zones. And two, multi-levels in the monitoring wells. There's nothing wrong with the wells the way they're constructed to take them to the next level and get the data you need.
So what is your opinion regarding the primary source of water for the residential properties surrounding the Angle Farm to their residential water wells?
It's the shallow aquifer, which is controlled by the higher elevations, for which it is the highest in the area.
And you think now, let's start with now, there's a potential for...
Objection. Ask him a question, don't lead him.
Under current conditions, before additional drip irrigation is actually added, what is the potential for water from the Angle property reaching the neighbor's property in a surface mode?
Well, I know Mr. Clark talked about wetlands and streams adjacent to the properties. However, when I reviewed the properties, most of the fields are surrounded by stone walls. When they removed it from the field, they stacked them up on the side. Excuse me, stacked them up on the sides. Plus, there seems to be a sort of a soil rise around it, and they're focused. However, in the southeast corner, there's a breach. It's equal elevation between the farm field and the adjacent property, and the stream is off no less than 100 feet off to the west, to the southwest. So there will be excess surface water entering the neighbor's property.
Did you review the Sewage Facilities Act planning module that had been submitted by the applicant or contained in its exhibit book?
I generally glanced at it to see what principles they were using and everything else. I don't have any debate, because it's obviously not my area, about the process they're dealing with. However, we all know that the parameters in the water are a big unknown. And when you've got a facility like this with so many unknowns of the companies and the usage, you just don't know what that quality is. And that's what I question, because if the quality goes down, you're gonna impact people. You're gonna
Let's
impact
now-
the water.
Objection. There's no facts and evidence for that. You can't sit here and speculate when there's not a bit of evidence there's not a bit in evidence other than what we've said about how it's gonna be taken care of.
Yeah, I mean, Doug, I mean, he's just speculating if somebody dumped biohazardous waste into the Delaware, that would affect the water system.
And
I'm
he's
saying,
tried to
like,
stay away from that, saying that
please.
that's not his purview. He's looking
Okay.
at the issue as water and where the water moves. So what,
The point I wanna make is not about the system itself.
But that's what this is about.
Exactly.
I realize that. But the setting you have can so easily be at risk if it's not perfect. All right? Not my area, I get it. But I've done contaminant migration.
If it's not his area,
okay,
then stop.
we're stopped. Stop. If additional water is added by drip irrigation, where will that, how will that additional water manifest itself with regard to the neighbors?
It'll recharge the aquifer and radially go out as shown in the figure 3 groundwater table map.
Will any of it have a surface impact?
Possibly, if the breakouts that we've discussed from the limiting zones occur, it will daylight. It basically will become its own short-term spring and add more surface water to it.
Do you hold the opinions and conclusions that you've drawn with a reasonable degree of certainty, utilizing the standards applicable in your fields of geology?
Yes, I do.
To this honorable board, I move Mr. Cribbs' testimony and his related special exhibits and his hydrological evaluation report dated June 6, 2024, identified.
How do you move it before cross-examination?
Well, it's going to be pending your cross-examination. I'm just trying to think of the numbers now, the I numbers where we started. I apologize. I think we started at I-9 and have moved through I-14, be accepted into evidence in this proceeding. I pass the witness to the board and to the applicant.
Good, Mark.
You know, I have a whole series of questions, but there's some sort of one-off things that you said that I want to see if I understand. If I understood what you said about the well, oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Cribbs, if I understand what you said about the wells that were drilled, that they were solid from top to bottom, and therefore they don't give you the right readings. Explain to me what you said.
I said they were slotted from top to bottom. In other words, they're basically open holes.
Is that good or bad?
For what you're trying to understand, not good.
Why is that?
Because it's in a recharge area, and the pressure diminishes when you go down into it. And when you leave an open hole, you now have the average from the high pressure to the low pressure. which gives you a lower number.
Okay, let me go on to something else. Now, this is I-13C,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
If I hold it up like this is the top, right?
Yes.
Now, here is Exhibit 12, our Exhibit 12. And our Exhibit 12 shows the preliminary drip field layout and soils plan. You see it?
Yes.
Okay. So let's put one up against the other. On the bottom of I-13C, you've circled a whole series of test pits, didn't you?
Yes.
They're down here in the buffer area where there's not going to be any drip irrigation, right?
Generally, but the scales are difficult to tell.
Come on. Here's this point, is this point. And then, if you come up along the side, over here on the left side, you got a buffer area, right? And you have a buffer area, don't you?
Yeah.
Where-
the board can't see what you're doing.
I don't need you to tell me what to do. You got a buffer area here, don't you? And that's the same area where you question this group.
I would disagree with where you're roping the diagram.
You would disagree.
Okay?
All right. Now, if you drilled 109 wells, and you, over the whole site, and then you decided you're not gonna, I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Mark,
Excuse me, don't talk to him while he's on
I'm talking to
cross-examine.
you. I'm just trying to find the actual source in your documents of the map you use, so you can have a reference to it.
This is I-13A, right?
It's I-13A, which is in their sewage facilities manual exhibit.
Excuse me, I'm in the middle of cross-examination.
Number 7, that's where you'll find R-13A and everything taken from it.
What's the difference?
Well, he's showing a different map.
He's showing the one that you just gave. The I-13A is the one you just identified.
He's doing I-13C, which we gave him, but not the underlying drawing, which he's comparing it to. I just wanted to
Oh, I'm not
make sure.
comparing it to the drawing that you made it from.
Okay.
I'm comparing it to where the drip fields are.
Okay.
And it's pretty obvious that the circled test pits that you got such a question about were not included in the area where there's going to be drip irrigation. Isn't that obvious?
No, it's not.
Oh, it's not obvious.
No, it's not obvious.
It's sure obvious down here on the bottom, isn't it?
I didn't question where things were. All I know
I
is,
asked you a question.
and I'm answering it, sir.
No, I don't think you are. Go ahead.
You're pointing to different areas, all right?
No, I'm not. I'm pointing to the bottom of the representation of the site.
Right.
And down here on the bottom, on Exhibit 12, there are no drip areas, are there?
No?
So, to the extent that we did some testing down there, why would we have to collect all that information? Why would we show it to DEP and waste their time if we're not going to use that area?
For part of it, but there's 30 points in there. And a lot of them are in the area where your drip irrigation system is.
Well, we'll get to that in the rest of my cross-examination. That's not accurate.
But before we go further, could you just
Want me to show you what I
where
do?
were you gesturing?
Yeah, I'm
can you just-
sorry.
That's, so it's applicant's 12, right? Is the exhibit?
Exhibit 12 is, as Fred and Joe Valentine testified, they used 22 acres out of the entire property. And Valentine's report,
Who's testifying now?
I was asked questions.
He's answering a question about,
Valentine's
Is this-
report shows all the information for 45 test holes. He then reduces that down to 11 areas. There's only, out of all of the test pits that were done,
all
I'm going
right,
to object
Mark,
to this line of testimony from counsel.
you are. You can do this on rebuttal.
okay, so what I'm saying is the question was raised by Mr. Cribbs. Why weren't these test pits down up on the bottom of the property that he circled? Why didn't we give that
And
information?
you're identifying the test pits on I-13C. Okay.
And the answer is very simple. It's in an area where we're not proposing infiltration. So why do we have to load up our reports with irrelevant information?
Okay.
So,
I do,
Hang on.
well, I find it very difficult to follow because our exhibit was pulled 13A, B, and C from their sewage facilities plan submission. And that drawing shows these test pits, right, all that area is in the area of the drip irrigation field.
no, it's not.
Well, then we need a drawing that shows where it is.
You need the test pits illustrated on this diagram.
No, I mean, hang on.
No, it's
hang on.
it's in Valentine's report.
Hang on. This, in the bottom left-hand corner of I-13A, that diagram that shows all of the test pits,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
That shows all of the test pits located on the entire 80-some acres.
As far as we could tell from what the monitoring logs then show, we can go to the text and show where the numbers appear.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, you would agree that the parcel, or that the shape of it's the shape of the parcel of land, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't understand what,
I don't
no, but
In other words,
he's saying that, well, why would they test? You're saying that you can't tell based on this diagram, you
Yeah.
couldn't tell where the drip irrigation field was?
May I?
Yeah, please, that's what I,
The problem is, all right, there's 30 points in there.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a strip along the bottom
30 points in where?
on 13C. Okay?
13
How?
well,
There's 30 points.
13 pits.
Yes, 13 pits that I've circled.
30, you said, I'm sorry.
I'm
right?
sorry, 30 pits that I've circled. All right? You got a strip along the bottom. That's true. But the other ones are interspersed further up.
Okay, so
Okay.
let's identify where those ones are that he's saying are
I'm
not.
going to get to it
All right,
in,
all right.
I have Valentine's report. We'll never get to it tonight, but we'll get to it.
May I just finish my point? We believe that is the Angle Farm property, and that's all we were showing. The large drawing showed the Angle Farm and the test pits on it. And as far as we knew, there were no other test pits conducted anyplace else on the properties that they owned.
I don't think there's any dispute to that,
Well, I
right?
thought that's exactly what he was disputing.
There's no dispute to that, that the test pits that are identified on, well, it would be your master utility plan from Dynamic Engineering, right?
These are preliminary test pits. That's,
Every
it
test
shows
pit. Yeah, yeah.
every test pit that we did.
Okay.
There's some there that we did one and then moved it right next to it.
Okay.
They've made a big deal out of this,
No, no,
like
no,
we're
no. I just-
hiding
No,
something.
my question was, there are not additional test pits that are not identified on these drawings somewhere else?
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
So I've read your report a number of times. You raised many hypothetical questions in your report, speculating about possible negative effects that may cause.
I object, you're characterizing his testimony. If you
It's
wanna ask him a question,
it's cross-examination, I can characterize his testimony.
well then say, do you agree with what you're
Don't
saying?
tell me how to try a case, Doug. I read your report a number of times. You've raised hypothetical questions in your report without answers. You speculate about possible negative effects that may occur, as I understand it, if hazardous or toxic materials are released into the groundwater by the proposed drip irrigation system. Isn't that accurate?
No, it's not.
Didn't you speculate that there may be, didn't you state that there may possibly occur, didn't you state that there could be negative effects from the discharge of contaminated materials into the groundwater through drip irrigation?
If there are any materials at all that are in the drip, they will get to the domestic well. That's a fact.
But you have absolutely no basis.
Excuse me.
You have absolutely no basis.
Except 40 years of drilling wells.
Excuse me. You have absolutely no scientific basis for saying that the conclusions of Mr. Ebert and Mr. Clark and Mr. Valentine, that this system has been designed in such a way that there can't be a spill of hazardous waste into the stormwater system.
We're talking about the
Let's
stormwater.
just stop.
I mean the stormwater system.
Drip irrigation.
Into the drip irrigation system.
I tried to keep it as narrow as I could, okay?
Did you do you understand how the system that Mr. Ebert designed has been designed to prevent the discharge of hazardous or toxic waste into the drip irrigation fields? Do you understand?
I've been told it's that way,
You've been told what?
that it's supposed to be designed that way.
Well, did you go through the design?
No, it's not my expertise.
So it's not your expertise, but you feel free to just speculate that it can happen. You give no credence to the testimony of Mr. Ebert. Did you read Mr. Ebert's testimony? You told me you read Mr. Ebert's testimony.
Yes,
And didn't he testify
he
about...
did. But there were flaws in other aspects of the testimony, so
So what? What about the testimony where he shows how at every building there will be testing and monitoring, and if there's any discharge, it gets shut off? How about that all of the effluent goes to a pump station down the bottom of the hill, and that will be tested before it's pumped? Do you agree that that's what his system says?
the system says, yeah.
And then when it's pumped up to the place where the SPR is, it's tested again, isn't it?
And what is it tested for?
What do you mean, what is it tested for?
What is it tested for?
It's tested for materials that cannot be biologically treated by the SPR. That's what it's tested for.
Total volatile organics? PFAS?
Why are you asking me?
You're testifying.
You're testifying, so yeah.
No, I didn't testify.
He's
I
asking a
asked-
question, he asked a question of Mark, I mean, can we just please, just get this on track as far as asking questions, this is.
You heard all of that, didn't you?
I heard, I read all of that.
You read all of that. And do you have some professional opinion that what they said about the prevention of hazardous waste getting into the drip irrigation system is wrong?
Not necessarily wrong.
Thank you. on page 3 of your report, you're saying that that the drip irrigation system will be disposing of waste. That's not accurate, is it?
Does DEP classify this material as potable water?
I'm asking the questions. I'm asking the questions.
It's considered waste all the way through this waste stream.
By whom?
By your regulation?
It's already been cleaned. The nitrogen's been reduced to below the drinking water standards. All of the other items that you're talking about have been cleaned out of it. How can you call it waste?
We're going by how DEP calls it. Because a lot of times they call it waste when there's nothing wrong with it.
Okay, so you don't really have an answer, you just use those words. But you have not performed any detailed analysis of Mr. Ebert's proposed collection, conveyance, and treatment system to support your assumption that hazardous or toxic materials will be released into the ground and the groundwater.
Objection, he didn't
by
say
that
they would
system.
be released, Mark. He said if they were, where it would flow. That was all his testimony was. He was talking about where water would
You
flow.
don't let me finish a question.
You're mischaracterizing what he said. He never
Make
said
an
what he
objection
said.
after the question is asked. I'm sorry, did you read my question
Yeah,
back?
please, and then the objection.
So you don't really have an answer, you just use those words. But you have not performed any detailed analysis of Mr. Ebert's proposed collection, conveyance, and treatment system to support your assumption that hazardous or toxic materials will be released into the ground and the groundwater.
By that system.
And your objection is what?
That he never said will be released into the ground.
I mean, his report says locating a waste disposable area in the highest elevations. I mean,
Is a risk. That's all he
yeah,
said.
but you're saying that he doesn't refer to it as a waste disposable area. That's what he's calling it. He's calling it
Well,
waste
that's
water.
different, no.
That's what he just said, right?
Yes, that's what.
I thought that's what he
He
just said.
didn't
So
say.
I would answer, what is this doing?
Well,
It's
you're
a
not-
wastewater system.
We're not here for you to ask questions. We're here to answer questions.
I'm answering your question.
With a question.
So,
So the answer to my question about whether or not you did any detailed analysis of Mr. Ebert's system is that you did not do it.
I will repeat what I said before. No, I did not. I'm evaluating the hydrogeology.
You would agree with me, I think, that before DEP will issue a permit for this system, it will have very carefully reviewed Mr. Ebert's system to satisfy itself that all of the monitoring, testing, and reporting protocols that Mr. Ebert testified about will actually perform that function. Isn't that the conclusion that they will make?
If they issue the permit, that's the conclusion they want to make.
Thank you. Let's get out Mr. Valentine's report. Do you have a copy of it?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's 13. You have it, Mr. Cripps?
Yes, I do.
Great. Would you look at the first paragraph? it says that VW Consultants completed hydraulic conductivity testing at the above referenced property from January 4, 2021 to January 8, 2021 in support of drip irrigation for on-lot sewage disposal. And then, in conjunction with this testing, VW performed 45 deep hole tests in December 2020 to delineate the suitable soils for the drip irrigation areas and to determine location for hydraulic conductivity testing. So you would agree with me that Joe Valentine started with 45 test pits, right?
Yes.
And it also says that both phases of the testing, the soil classification and then the permeability testing, were witnessed by DEP soil scientists. You see that?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to question that fact?
No.
Now going to page 2. Under site soils, the report states that the soil profiles were described in accordance with the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, SCS, Soil Conservation Service, Soil Survey Manual Handbook, and the USDA NRCS Field Book for describing and sampling soils. Do you see that?
Yes.
You agree that these two manuals are the proper manuals for doing this type of testing, don't you?
Yes.
The last sentence of the second paragraph says, quote, in general, the site soils can be classified as having deep depth to bedrock, as a majority of the test pits do not encounter bedrock within 40 inches of the ground surface. You see that, don't you?
Yes.
And do you have any reason to disagree with that conclusion?
Not specifically, no.
Now going to the third paragraph, it says that in 13 test pits, redoxomorphic features were encountered because there is a perched water table in those 13 pits. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to doubt Joe's conclusion?
Whether it's perch remains to be seen totally, but it is definitely a limited zone.
Well, why do you doubt that it's a perched water table? Do you have any information that it's not a perched water table?
No.
And you've probably known Joe Valentine for the 40 years that I've known him. And he's a very qualified guy, isn't he?
Yeah.
Now, that paragraph also says that a regional groundwater table was not observed in any of the test pits. Do you have any reason to doubt that statement?
No.
Now, the last sentence in that paragraph says, based on the soils observed within all test pits, the site soils can be generally classified as moderately well-drained and well-drained, except for 3 test pit outliers with redox features at less than 20 inches, as noted on the soil profile descriptions. Do you have any reason to disagree with that description?
I would generally question the aspect, because at that point in time, no wells were even drilled. They don't know where the groundwater table is specifically. All right, it didn't get into the test pits, but the test pits are only 40 inches down.
Pardon me? I didn't hear
The test pits are only 40 inches down, okay? And the redox, when you have a perched water table, The only way you can document that it's perched is to penetrate the perching layer and confirm that it's unsaturated beneath it.
Or in this case, you cannot do your drip irrigation in the areas where the redoxamorphic features were exhibited, right?
But a lot of
Right,
these,
yes or no?
right.
Thank you. Now, the next section is entitled Hydraulic Conductivity Testing. You see that section?
Yes.
The first paragraph says that 28 of the 45 pits were tested for hydraulic conductivity. You see that?
Yes.
So, and this goes to this, you don't understand all these pits. So while Mr. Valentine started his investigation with 45 locations to investigate the soils, he eliminated 17 of them from consideration after he dug the pits and actually went into the pits to examine the soil profiles, didn't he?
I would assume that's what's described.
Now you agree with me, the rest of that paragraph talks about technical data on how the conductivity was
Right.
performed, right?
Right.
Now let's go to the next page. Next page is a chart. You see the chart, you're on the next page, are you not?
Yes.
Now that chart contains a summary of the permeability testing depths and the hydraulic conductivity rates obtained by the test, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So the chart contains the results for testing in 28 pits, doesn't it?
Correct.
And it contains 7 columns across the top, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So let's go through those columns. The first column is the depth of the pits, isn't it?
Correct.
And the depths range from 40 inches to 50 inches, don't they?
Yes, they do.
The second column gives the depth to redoxamorphic features, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And of the 28 pits, redoxamorphic features were found in 8 pits, right?
Correct.
Do you have any reason to doubt that?
No, I pointed out in my report.
Now the next 2 pits, the next 2 columns say that neither rock nor groundwater was encountered in any of the 28 pits. You see that?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to doubt that?
No.
The next column contains the results of permeability testing. Do you see that, and do you see the results?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to doubt the permeability testing or the hydraulic conductivity testing?
No, and I didn't bring it up in my report. I don't contest it.
Now let's look at the last 3 lines on that page. It says that the second chart, located on the next page, restates the same 7 columns of information as stated in the chart we just looked at, but it only deals with the information for 11 test pits. I read that correctly?
Correct.
And it also says those 11 test pits are located within the proposed drip irrigation fields. That's what it says, doesn't it?
Right.
So you'd agree with me that we started out with 88 acres or 90 acres, whatever the Engle site has, and between Ebert and Valentine, they limited down the area, the total area of the site that they proposed for drip irrigation to some 22 acres, right?
Yes.
And those are the only areas where the emitters, the drip emitters, will be installed, right?
I would assume that's the design.
And there are no redoxamorphic features in any of those areas, are there?
I believe there are two.
Where? You haven't even gotten to the next chart.
I'm looking at the one, the reduction chart. You told me to go to that. Okay? And listing 9 and 6 have 24-inch redoxamorphic.
You're right.
And by the way, 11 points in 22 acres is pretty slim.
Well, we started with 109.
I don't care
and we
how
went
many
to
you started
45.
I don't care how many you started for. The density of testing within your drip irrigation is critical to evaluating the site.
So that's your opinion.
No, that's DEP's opinion.
No, but DEP passed on and accepted these tests.
You say that.
I
You get
do.
him in here and we'll talk to him about what's
I-
approved and what isn't.
I do say that. I do say that. And so does Fred, and so does Joe Valentine, and so does Fred Clark. So are you going to call them a liar?
I questioned it. I'm not calling him a liar, but I
Then they'd
questioned
have to be a liar, wouldn't they? Excuse me one second. Now, again, you would agree with me that all 11 test pits are more than 40 inches deep,
Yes.
and there were no groundwater encountered.
Yeah.
Similarly, there is no rock encountered.
Correct.
I'm sorry, similarly, there is no
Rock.
rock.
And you would agree with me that the soil investigation reveals that in the 11 test pits, they can be classified as deep, moderately well drained, or well drained and moderately deep pantail.
That's how it's characterized.
That's pretty good, isn't it?
It would be.
It's about as good as it gets when you're going to discharge stormwater or this type of water.
Actually, DEP requires 6 pits per acre.
It requires
For
what?
stormwater, they require 6 pits per acre.
For what?
For stormwater, what you just said.
We did 109.
No, in the area you're putting it into, it's 6 pits per acre.
For stormwater, we're not talking about stormwater.
Well, based on the volumes we're talking about, you're not too far off.
Now, based on the soil study, it revealed that the soils on site can actually absorb significantly more water than that which is to be discharged by the proposed drip irrigation system. That's what this testing reveals, doesn't it?
It does, but I don't believe it takes into account of the bedrock itself.
Now, you've talked about slopes, and in your report, you say that we're doing the drip irrigation on steep slopes. Would you agree with me that the maximum slope in the 11 areas is really 5%? The slopes don't exceed 5%?
Thereabouts.
Pardon me?
Thereabouts.
Now, talking about all this breakout that you're talking about, Mr. Clark's mounding analysis concludes that there will be an 8-foot separation between the groundwater and the drip emitters that will be installed. Isn't that what his report says?
Yes.
And you would agree with me that DEP only requires a 4-foot separation, right?
Yes, but that's usually for sanitary sewers and domestic septic systems.
Are you agreeing with me or you're not agreeing with me?
I think it was obvious, I don't agree with you.
You don't agree that DEP requires only 4 foot of separation between the source of the water and the groundwater?
Yes, that's what they said required.
What do you want to do?
It's up to you. I was gonna give you until you came to a natural stopping point. If you want to stop
I
now,
got a lot more.
then let's stop now.
Okay.
These bugs are getting out of hand.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
So, just to confirm, Adrian, you are good for next Tuesday?
I will have somebody.
Alright. So, what we're gonna do, like we discussed, we're gonna continue this till next Tuesday, 7 o'clock here. Go ahead.
Yeah, no,
Oh, I was gonna say, just so this is your notice. There's not gonna be anything, there's not gonna be a new publication of this. It will be on the website, I think it was this time, so, but it will be next Tuesday here, 7 o'clock.
and here's was my question. I think, well, Mr.
My,
Sturman can be here next Tuesday,
well,
and will be.
if your,
Mr. Cribbs.
if your problem is that only, your other expert is only available,
Well, I will see if he will be ready and timely to deliver his report.
Oh,
I
that's
think
right.
that 3 people come and not get, I mean, if we're another
Well,
hour.
I've really started to prepare for this gentleman, so I would really like to hear his testimony next week if that's possible.
you mean Sterling?
Yeah.
Well, that was the plan.
Okay, well, let's keep that then.
But Mr. Elliott will not be available for most of July, and he was going to be the witness after Mr. Sterling. And I don't know that he could be here next week and be ready. We haven't talked to him about that. He was available, but I don't know that he,
And he is the soil scientist?
I would characterize him as that.
Nah, we don't think
An
so.
environmental engineer, but a specialty in kind of soil science and.
No, hang on, just wait until we're, just in case we have to put anything else on.
So the only question would be, if I have Mr. Cribbs and Mr. Sterling, I think they could probably fit in. But if I have to switch to Mr. Cole, in courtesy to him, I have to talk to him
So wait,
about that.
Mr. Cole is who's not, Mr. Cole, you're not available in
I don't
July?
mean Mr. Cole, I mean
Oh.
Elliott, Mr. Elliott.
I mean, you don't know when he's back in July?
Yes, the end of July, 29th, I think it was.
Well, that would be would it be the second meeting in July?
No, he's gone the whole month except for the 29th through 31st, I believe.
So the 29th is what you're saying? Is that correct? The Monday, the 29th?
That's what I,
Well, we could do this after the next one.
Right, yeah.
We can schedule this after the next hearing.
Proposing moving them ahead of.
Well, that's what we were trying to figure out.
Elliott would be all right on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of the end of July.
Why don't you narrow down to a date?
Well, we can make that the second day.
Narrow it down to a date and tell us next week.
Okay.
In other words.
Yeah, right.
See if you can get a date for him by Tuesday. I'm talking about the end of the month.
We're talking the end of July.
And then it would be the plan if he were he and Alexis would be Mr. Cole, they could probably both be available. I think you were available the end of July as well.
Then we're only got one in July.
Pardon?
Not the beginning of August.
Right, at the end of July. We can try to double check. Okay.
Wait, Doug, just so I'm clear,
29th, 30th.
you've had Mr. Cribbs and you have Mr. Sorley, you have somebody named Taylor, Elliott,
Mr. Herschel Elliott is our third, and Charlie Cole, Charles Cole.
And that's your 4 witnesses.
4 experts, I might put on a citizen just at the end.
Well, then you have witnesses that we can get through
In the beginning
in
of
the,
July.
in the beginning of July. What we're trying to figure out is if we have an earlier meeting in July, do you have enough witnesses to fill that day? I think you do.
I don't have Mr. Elliott available.
Mr. Elliott can go the end of
It would
July.
only be Mr. Cole
Mr. Cole and the citizen.
who could do that, I suppose. I was gonna have it in a different order, but we could do Elliott last and you first if we had to. And that assumes we get. Well, oh. You're at. One of my clients is going during July.
I mean, what am I gonna do? Put it off to September? Well, decide, we're good for next, we're good for next
Tuesday, correct?
Correct, the 25th.
Coordinate when you're.
Yeah.